The whole process of grieving really is about the transformation of the relationship in the physical form to the spiritual form, and preparing the way to come to know the different form of that relationship and honoring it. As I think about my son, I feel like there is a sense of freedom that I can feel in his soul for not having the limitation of his physical body.
Reverend Meghan Brooks, welcome to the show, author of Unraveling Grief. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I was actually listening to you this morning a little bit. I heard you, I think you were subbing in for a minister in Kentucky.
Oh,
Yeah. And
yes.
then
Yeah.
I was reading a little bit of your book, and I started to think, and I got teary eyed. So I might get teary eyed today because you have a powerful story. So thank you.
Thank you. Emotions are good things, so I always allow them.
Yeah, you're right. And for the longest, I try to keep them inside me, and that made me sick.
It does make sense. And it's something that, as I'll share, it's like we aren't told to value our emotions or even how to process them or recognize them for what they are. And so there is a learning process in understanding that suppressing our emotions can literally cause disease.
Mm. Yeah, you're right. A lot of modern
Mhm.
science is telling us this too.
Mhm.
I guess my first question is, who was Megan Smith Brooks before this traumatic, horrifying event that happened to you?
Wow. Um, it's like we all just go along in our lives, doing what's before us, doing what we think we want to do, what we feel is important to us, managing the best that we can. And that's what I thought I was doing. And I have two sons. They're 2.5 years apart, and each one of them, as they have evolved into their own manhood, have had evolved in different ways. And so it was just trying to stay connected with them and their family lives. And I don't think that you can ever plan in when you're moving forward the capacity to deal with trauma and unexpected loss, and yet it's a part of our human experience.
Hmm. You wrote a powerful line right in your introduction, I believe it was, and it says, "My heart stopped." And when I heard that,
Mm,
I understood that because I was with my father when he fell off the cliff, and I had to get his body. But I would like to see if
mhm.
you can walk us through this horrific event, if you don't mind.
No, I don't. I think that there's a value in sharing our stories, and especially when we're on the other side of it and we can say how I managed to get through it. Um, we're talking about a story of my youngest son, Justin, who at the age of 29 years old was murdered intentionally. And so at the time that it happened, I remember trying to reach out and call him. I was on my way to the airport. I was going to meet 500 colleagues at a ministry conference at sea in Florida. And I wanted to let him know that I wouldn't be available, that my cell phone may not be operating. And I couldn't get a hold of him, which isn't always, unusual, but I left him a message, and I had turned off my cell phone traveling across country from California to Florida. I turn on my phone. I'm at baggage claim. And my oldest son, Ryan, is calling me saying, "Mom, are you sitting down? I've been trying to reach you all day." So when somebody says that to you, you go immediately like, "Oh my God, what's happening? Just tell me." And he said, "I don't know how to tell you, but Justin's gone." I'm like, "What do you mean he's gone?" He said, "They found his body in the river and we don't know what happened." And that's the moment my heart stopped, because your mind goes into denial. And it's like, what? No, I didn't hear that. That can't possibly be. I mean, I tried to call him and I couldn't reach him, but that's my baby. That couldn't happen. And yet it did. And you get slammed into, it's like a tsunami hits you and knocks you out of your body. So it was like I wasn't in my body for quite a while. I was just watching this scenario of this somebody else's movie going on and having to somehow find a way to plod my way through it. Eventually found out that my son's body had been found in a river outside of Kansas City, Missouri, by a fisherman. A lot of details weren't shared with me by the detectives initially, but we came to find out that his body had been wrapped in a chain and attached to a cinder block. So they knew that he was intentionally thrown into the river. He had been shot. So we found out later he had not drowned. And then it's like every new detail, it was like another level of horror that was added to the story of how could that be? That was my child. That was my little boy. Why would somebody do such a thing? And the first thing you discover is there are no answers to the why questions. There is no conceivable reason for that. And eventually, it was a year and a half later that the detectives arrested two individuals that had picked my son up when his car ran out of gas, and he called his girlfriend for help, and these guys were sent. There were people he knew, not really close friends. And one of them uh, pulled a gun on him, and they were trying to beat him up and shot him 3 times. I read the coroner's report, and again, it was like the horror of how could that happen. I was grateful that I didn't have to see his body, that I could remember the image as I know him as a bright, blue-eyed, handsome young man with a brilliant smile. And we came to find out that these individuals had been hired by his father-in-law to get rid of him. So again, another level of horror. And how could anybody do that? And I'm not going to name names, but that part of the case is still open-ended because the evidence had dried up and they have no physical evidence other than the word of a convicted criminal, and the prosecutor won't take on a case without evidence. So my son had a 5-year-old daughter at the time of his death. My heart, my mother's heart, sometimes I still have to remind it to breathe, to come back into the present moment.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I feel a lot more than I used to because I was so used to numbing myself, and a lot of the trauma that I experienced as well, I could feel it, and it's strong in me now. I don't think we could ever fully heal. And one thing I heard you say is because my brother-in-law got shot in the head when we were younger, and his daughter, my niece, was 5 years old. So that was really touching when I heard that, and I'm gonna get teary eyed because you have a powerful story, and it's the human condition, and that's what connects us, and grieving, and with my father, yeah, my heart stopped, and I didn't know how to deal with that. And one of the things you touch in the book, and I went to the 12-step rooms. I was an alcoholic, and my alcohol amplified after that, and you said you could understand how people want to numb themselves, and I'm paraphrasing you in the book. It's easy to lean into addiction once you experience this trauma that we experience, and that's what happened to me. I started to numb myself even more than I once did, that I did before, and I was already numbing myself a lot, but it just amplified when my father died because I don't know how to process this stuff. Is grief a form of trauma, and how does it impact us as individuals in ways we may not even be aware of?
I believe that it is a form of trauma, and yet grief is a part of the human experience. Nobody escapes the loss of um, life, especially the things that hit us the most are the loss of somebody that we're close to. And yet we all are going to die at some point in some way. I know I've had a lot of people say to me, but a mother isn't supposed to outlive her child.
Mm.
And that may be what we expect, but that isn't necessarily always the case. And every time I see a story on the news where a trauma has happened and catastrophic loss, my heart grieves for those that are beginning the process. The thing is that grief is a part of our human experience, and we all carry with us unresolved grief
Mhm.
because we have not been taught how to process it or understand it and how it is a part of our life experience. There is a very huge part of it that is, it's our teacher. It brings us gifts of awareness of who we are that we may not have ever discovered before had we not had the courage to go into the dark abyss.
Mm.
And so, as we have the courage to feel the depth of the pain, and that's what it is that we don't want to feel, the woundedness, the shattered heart, the emotional and physical pain at times. Um, an addictive process is an escape from having to deal with that which will always wait for you, right?
Yeah.
It's like no matter how numb you get and how often, that broken heart, that wound, that pain, it will wait for you. We still have to process it. So as we can come to terms of understanding the value of embracing it now versus later, I begin to move it, and you can't climb over it, you can't bury it, you can't hide from it. The only way is to go through it, to just feel like you're losing yourself, and yet you open yourself to the potential of something of value. And it's not something you experience immediately, it's a
Mm.
process. And so that's where I've come to understand is we can love ourselves enough to embrace all of the pain and the trauma of life. And any form of a loss, any form of change is changing from one form into another where you can't put it back together in the same form. We grieve that because it's something we can't have anymore that we found we had value with. So, how do we shift from the pain consuming us to discovering the value that it offers us?
Yeah, thank you. You also brought up victimhood or victim consciousness. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how important is it not to fall into that and get stuck in that?
Well, and that's what can come from addiction, in that we fall into victimhood because we feel like something has happened to us, and we feel helpless, and that and so it's easy to give up because it's like, why? What's the point? Why even try? And it's very easy to allow that wound to consume us, to where our story becomes, it's about how the world hurt me or someone hurt me, and it's like a badge of honor that we wear.
Mm.
And yet, as long as we're living in that place, we are diminishing who we are. We are not allowing our potential to flourish, to explore, to expand, to transform, to be all that we can, so that we are inviting the possibility of something better into our life. So when we can shift from being a victim to being a survivor, I think it's what I talked about, is like, then there's a resiliency that comes in that. I survived something unimaginable that nobody would want to choose to go through. I certainly didn't. And yet I found I could overcome it and find a way forward to find meaning in life. That's resiliency. That's building an inner strength so that I have a stronger foundation that I might be less likely to be knocked off of the next time something painful happens in my life.
Mm. Yeah, you got me thinking back into my childhood as being a young teenager, and it was pretty much normal to get shot at, or your friend getting shot, or my brother-in-law getting shot in the head, or the football game when we would play with our rival football team. In Wilmington, I'm from San Pedro, and Wilmington football games. The Banning Pilots against the San Pedro Pirates. It was always a drive-by during my day, and that was normal. And And I look back and I didn't know how to deal with all my friends that got murdered, got shot, you know, seeing them one minute and they go out for a drive and you say you don't want to go with them, and you the next morning you hear so and so got his head blown off, shot in the chest, shot in the,
Wow.
it's just like wow. And I didn't know how to deal with all those emotions. No wonder why I was drinking so much and numbing myself and hurt people.
It's even it's hard to live in that kind of constant state of fear
Mm,
of not knowing whether you're going to have another day or week. And even I saw with my son, he struggled with addiction. His father was emotionally and mentally abusive. I felt like I had to escape that marriage with my boys.
mm,
They were 3 and 5 at the time. And when he was 18, he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he had to deal with cancer. And there was always a part of him that wasn't sure whether it would be safe to plan for a future. So I would think in the same circumstances, when you're dealing with trauma and fear and violence as a way of living, how can you have the courage to consider a future that might actually be um, successful or happy, that you could look forward to? And so we get these messages from the experiences of our life. And if we don't have some awareness that I don't have to accept that as my truth, I can shift it in my thoughts, I can redirect myself, or there are resources available that I can seek, then there's no wonder that we see hopelessness, especially in our young people.
mm.
I've been dealing with a number of mothers who have young teenagers that are suicidal because they're afraid of the world. They've been bullied. So, but I stand here knowing that no matter what trauma, violence, fear, experience we've had, at the core of who we are, there is a wisdom and a strength that knows the way to thrive, that we can lean in on to just, instead of being fearful, be curious,
Mm.
to consider another possibility.
You talk about making friends or peace with grief, and grief
Mm,
becomes your teacher. You also talk about spiritual healing. Would you like to touch on that for
yes.
us?
I'd like to actually share with you a piece that I wrote on my book when I was sitting with thinking about what is grief. Why does it exist in our reality?
Mm,
What is it that I can understand about it that can be useful in my life? Because as a spiritual educator, I'm always looking at anything, no matter what it is, has value for us and could be useful. We just may not be looking at it in the right way. And so this is what came to me. I said, my experience is that grief slowly creeps into every part of us. It infiltrates our thoughts and feelings. It seeps into our emotions and it crawls into our hearts. It finds its way into the cells of our body and it takes over how it functions. It finds its way into every aspect of our lives, our relationships, how we respond to the world around us, our behaviors, our perception of life on every level. And in time, we can't even recognize ourselves as grief has taken up residence in who we are. So I've decided my only option is to make friends with grief, since we're going to be hanging out with each other so much for a lifetime. And I realize it is a lifetime relationship, whether I like it or not. So it's a good idea to take steps to get to know my new friend that seems
mm.
to be influencing so much of who I am now. And starting from that place, we begin to shift from seeing grief and pain as our enemy, as something that prevents us from living, to seeing that it is an unavoidable part of life that offers us an opportunity to go deeper into discovering who we are in a way we never probably would have done on our own. So we needed something to just kind of like throw us into the hole. And as we have the courage to feel the pain, what I've discovered is that we create space to hold it. It's not about getting rid of it so it will go away and we never feel it again. But it's allowing it, because it's taking up residence, a space for it. So that I can sit with it and say, then, what can I learn from you? What is it I need to know about myself that I didn't recognize before? And then what is it that the form of grief that I'm struggling with, and usually it's an emotional loss of somebody we love. What is it about them that I recognized that I admire or appreciate? What is it about them that I could consider integrating into who I am as a way of honoring them with how I live moving forward?
Hmm.
And then we begin to see the value of what grief is shining for us to see. And that I don't have to, well, let me just say this. I had to process my feelings of feeling like my son's potential had been taken away from him. At 29, he should have had many more years of living. So I had to process that and letting go of that anger and use it to consider, yet the 29 years that he did live, he offered something of his presence to my life. What is that I can allow to be a part of me, so I'm honoring him every day of my life moving forward? And one of the gifts that Justin offered me was um, fearlessness. He had this way of sometimes going too close to the edge. But, he was the little boy that climbed the tree and would go out to the branches to see how far you could go before it would break. He spent a lot of time in an emergency with that one. He was walking at 9 months. He was climbing up on things, getting into things. He was curious. And so I found that I lived my life a little too safe. So if I was a little more fearless, a little more curious, like Justin, perhaps it's a way of honoring him so that I could include more of my life experience in my day to day moments. And thank him for that.
Were you able to forgive the people that did that to your son?
It's interesting. I shared at the beginning of my book a statement that I wrote for a parole hearing. The two individuals that were arrested and charged and are now in prison, one of them actually pulled the trigger and had a longer sentence. It ended up not going to trial. It was negotiated because their guilt was obvious. That one had 22 years in prison, having to serve a minimum of 15 before he could be eligible for parole. And the younger one, who was a participant, he was only 19. That's the other thing I think about. All the different lives that were impacted by a choice they made to take my son's life. It wasn't just me and my son. It was my family, my granddaughter. It was their families, their friends. And so I went to there was a parole hearing for the first young man, because he's the one that shared some of the information, and they gave him a lighter sentence in exchange for that, even though it's gone nowhere. And he did not have a minimum parole set. In the state of Missouri and in most states, I've come to understand that the parole is set so that there is a supervised process of integrating an inmate back into society. Otherwise, if they serve their full sentence and were released without supervision, most of them reoffend. They don't have a process that supports them. So that's how it's meant to serve a purpose. And I had a victim advocate who encouraged me to write a statement to share at the parole hearing. And so I wrote my thoughts down. I went to the hearing. The defendant was at the prison on a camera, so I could see him on a screen, but he couldn't see me. And I read him the statement, and I could tell he was listening. And I told him that part of my spiritual practice is forgiveness, that I could forgive his soul for choosing an inappropriate action, well, more than inappropriate, because we do that when we are living out of awareness of our divine self. when we are living in survival mode, when we are living in being conditioned by the human experience, when we're living in a lack of awareness of our own inner light, if we were living solely based on our inner guidance of spirit, we would not choose to take someone else's life unless it was in self-defense. We would not choose to do a lot of the things that people do. And forgiveness is something we do for ourselves. It is not to get somebody off the hook. It does not mean that they aren't responsible for their actions and accountable for that, but that I'm releasing the emotional energy that I'm holding so that it doesn't hold me in prison
Mm.
and hold me back from having a more abundant and thriving life. And so I release the energy of anger and resentment that I may be holding for myself. It's a gift I give myself. And yet I also hold that there is a process in place that anybody responsible for choosing to act outside of their own divinity is accountable for that. And that's, we learn from those experiences. There's a value in that. I said, you are where you need to be. And my hope for you is that you learn to forgive yourself and to learn from yourself and use the system so that when you are released someday, you can be a more valuable contributor to society than you were when you went in. And that's the way that I live with it.
Mm. Yeah, you talk about moving forward in this continuous process of healing and transformation. Have you as the years went by, have you experienced a deeper transformation of awakening?
Mm. Like, yes. And I look back, my son has not been with me in the physical for 10 and a half years now. Part of my mind has a hard time wrapping around that as reality. And I still have moments where I ache to see his face, to hear his voice, to hold him. I want to scream at the world. I want to scream at life. And I know how easy it is for people to blame God for their pain. And yet, the truth is, there is no supreme being in the sky up there making judgment on things. And there isn't a God up there in the sky that is choosing who deserves what. It is a creative energy of life. And so when I go back to that and I realize that we are just aligning with vibrational energy, we are allowing it to live through us. And as I can move myself back within to listen to that voice of guidance, I bring my questions, I bring my fears, but I'm open and receptive to the possibility of something that moves me forward in a way that allows me to have a more meaningful life, a life of purpose, a life of expressing. And so the transformation happens gradually. And so it doesn't mean that you will never feel the pain of loss again. It doesn't mean that you won't have your moments where you cry. And like I said, scream sometimes. But I have a tool of just being with it so that I can shift back to feeling the gratitude for who my son was and what he offered me. And so grateful that he chose to have at least 29 years in relationship with me. That is a gift I would never want to give up. And the only way for the pain to go away is for me to not have any memory of his existence. Would I want to choose that? No, of course not. So there's a transformational moment every time we feel that come back up, and we can see it for what it is and go back to what am I grateful for? What it was the gift in this? How can I choose to move forward? I had a statement I shared in my book, and my older son, Ryan, when the book was first published, I sent him a copy, and he he called me at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he said, "Mom, I thought I'd go to bed and I'd start reading your book." He said, "But I couldn't put it down.
Mm.
I had to read the whole thing because I didn't know what it was like for you. I didn't know, and I didn't know what it is that you can help people with in understanding pain." And he said, "There's something you said that I put on my desktop so I can look at it every morning. And it said, every morning I have the opportunity to wake up and choose how I'll show up.
Mm.
That's what we learn in the moment of our pain. I can choose how I want to show up in this moment. Will I let this pain drag me down and diminish who I am, or will I use it to say, I can overcome this and I can use it to be more of why I'm here? And that's a transformational moment that happens over and over again.
Thank you. You mentioned the Beatitudes. What are those, and how did you use that for the healing process as well?
Yeah, the Beatitudes are the teachings of Jesus. That it's interesting I like to call them Beatitudes, attitudes for life. Each one of them is a lesson. And it's been said from a spiritual context of the Bible, if we were to lose everything except for the Beatitudes in the Lord's Prayer, we would have the context of all of Jesus' teachings,
Mm.
which is really giving us a way of living, and all that we need to learn and grow and evolve in life. And so when I look at the Beatitude that has to do with healing our hearts, let me see if I can find that place in the book while I'm looking. But it offers us a way of processing a moment in time where we feel like we've lost ourselves,
Mm.
and that the pain that we feel is a way for us to connect with all humanity and to realize that it is simply offering me a way of connecting into the strength that I am. Um, Let me see if I can give me a moment here to find the chapter that had that spiritual context in it. 94. So the Beatitudes are in what is called the Sermon of the Mount in the Bible. And each one is a lesson in itself, but it's blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And what I've come to understand, if you really translate what the language was, what Jesus was offering, is that to mourn is to seek.
Mm.
It is to seek something in depth that will support me, that will offer me comfort, or will offer me what I need. It is seeking to know God. What is it that gives us the greatest comfort is to find that there is a divine spirituality, there's a divine essence that is the nature of who I am, that I can lean in on and that will lead the way. And that is where we find our blessings. So it might seem like a contradiction to say, blessed are those who mourn. But it's really saying that blessed are those who seek to know God and find comfort there, and discover a gift that can support them. And that's the value of spiritual teachings of whatever source that you find that gives you something to inspire you, something to enrich you, something to open your heart and to contemplate in a deeper way.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the main purposes of putting this podcast together is to help create a broader lens, looking from help us go from looking through the elusive ego to the lens of the heart. And I hear you doing that with us today, and thank you. You mentioned about grief to gratitude. Like, how do you do that without broadening your lens?
It's a process. And as a result of writing the book, I also created an online course that I call Unraveling Grief to Thrive. And it really is. And I have embedded within my book, there are 4 guided meditation exercises to help with the healing and the transformational, the growth. Um, for me, healing is about claiming our wholeness. It's not about fixing a problem or making something go away so I don't have to deal with it. Because the healing comes in our embracing it to learn what it has to offer, so that really what I'm wanting to do is align back in the balance of my wholeness, the balance between my divine nature and my human nature. Each of them serves a purpose for our existence in this physical experience. And so, one of the exercises that I offer is taking you into the depth of pain so we can feel it, we can experience it for what it is, we can begin to see the value and what the legacy of our loved one is offering us, and then shift to our treasured memories. All of those things that bring a smile to our face, the things we can appreciate, the things that we hold in our heart that no one can ever take away from you. Remember, those are the gifts no one can take from you, that are there forevermore. And so, can I begin to feel grateful for those things? I ask my coaching clients, I said, would you rather give up all those memories so that you don't have to feel the pain of loss? And I've never had anybody say that they would rather give up the pain and not have had those memories.
Mm.
So then, how does it serve me? It serves me moving forward by finding a way to be grateful for those treasured moments, for those special memories that can continue to inspire me. And it also reminds you of the capacity you have to love. The deeper the pain, the deeper capacity you have to love. Because if I didn't love, I wouldn't care, right? So honor yourself for feeling the depth of your pain, because that is acknowledging the depth of infinite love that you are.
I always say,
So in the beginning, it's like finding, what can I be grateful for? I can be grateful that I'm breathing,
mm,
that my next breath, it's like you break it down to the smallest pieces and you build on that. And eventually that gratitude is what shows us our way forward.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I always say grief is a way of showing we love very well. How do you connect grief with
Mhm.
love?
Well, it's like I said, it represents the capacity we have to love,
Mm,
and that our whole nature is love, not in like a romantic love, but it is said that love is the harmonious energy of life that connects us all as one. And so I'm aligning with the harmony of the universe when I feel love. And love includes the love for things that we miss, the love for things that we've had an experience of that we can no longer experience in the same form. The whole process of grieving really is about the transformation of the relationship in the physical form to the spiritual form, and preparing the way to come to know the different form of that relationship and honoring it. As I think about my son, I feel like there is a sense of freedom that I can feel in his soul for not having the limitation of his physical body. He's the one that jumped out of an airplane, was on his bucket list. And I have a video of him jumping out of that plane and the smile on his face and him going, yes. And when he
mhm.
landed, it was like, oh my God, the most exciting thing in the world. And I can feel that joy in my heart. That's connecting with the sense of love that I am and the love that I have with him. And so grief reminds us of the value of love. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is. You had Maryann Williamson write the forward. How did that come about? I love Maryann Williamson, and her words are strong. What she says about you.
Well, I am very grateful, and this was before, obviously she took on a whole nother role of um, shining her light in the world. I have had the opportunity to cross paths being in ministry. One of the first books that really transformed my life and my early journey in the 1980s of spirituality was reading her book, Return to
Mm,
Love. And um, and so I've had the opportunity to cross paths with her a number of times, where she was a lecturer at Seattle Unity Church when I was in that community, kind of evolving in my spirituality. As a minister, when I was in California, a member of my community was part of her Course in Miracles group that had a weekly, she spoke weekly. And so I went with her and we had a chance to chat about ministry, because at that point she'd already had served a Unity church in Detroit and understood the role of ministry. And she's very supportive of ministers in the role that we have in bringing spiritual education to the world. When I was in Cincinnati, my husband and I are co-ministers. We invited her to come to our community to speak. And we had a great opportunity to chat. And I told her that I was called to write a book and I was working on it. And she said, well, writers write. So you just make that a part of your commitment of what you do, is that you write. And so when my book was birthed, I reached out to her. I had a contact through her assistant. And because she had told me that she recognized the value of processing grief, that it was an important part of our human experience, and we needed to have the courage to bring it out into our conversations more. And so she was aware of my story, and she read my transcript, and she said that she wanted to help bring that out into the world to help heal and transform others. And I was really in awe that she was willing to do that. Her assistant kept reminding me, she said, well, she just doesn't do this anymore. She's just too busy. But she really felt guided to speak to your book. So it was a tremendous gift.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember when you guys had her come to Cincinnati, and I was upset with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Something happened where I couldn't attend because I really wanted to go and I didn't make it. But yeah,
There were no seats left in the house, I have to tell
I
you.
bet. So you're not only an ordained Unity minister, a spiritual educator, and an author, but you're also a grief coach. What is a grief coach, and what does that look like when you're working with someone?
That's a good question. I think it's important to clarify that there's a difference between a counselor and a coach. And so, though I've taken a lot of classes in psychology and understanding that, and been a spiritual counselor within my spiritual communities, a coach is not working from the psychological perspective, but in how we can challenge somebody to embrace whatever their challenges in life and find a way to heal and transform it using exercises of awareness within themselves to begin to write their story anew. To really to challenge themselves to redefine who they are and how set goals for themselves. And so as a coach, it's like I'm a cheerleader, helping them process. I'm giving them some tools and then collaborating with them, but the client is really doing the work, because that's the only way that you really transform the condition of your experience, is by doing the work. But most of us need some kind of support and guidance along the way. When I stepped down from being a co-minister in the church in Cincinnati, I was really feeling at that time and it was when I was being called to write my book, that I wanted to do something more to support people in healing and transforming grief. And I discovered a program that I went through to become certified as a coach. And then as a result of my book, like I said, I also wrote an online course. And so I'm very selective in taking individual clients, but I offer the online course because it's self-paced, so you can do it in your own terms. But I have a weekly Q&A to support you. And I think that's what's really empowering, that a coach offers an empowerment process to somebody that's ready to transform their lives.
I just sat down had lunch with a buddy who went to Egypt with, and he does therapy. He teaches. He's a therapist, and he does therapy through artwork. And I seen your beautiful cover in your book that's in back of me. Did you do that artwork, or did you have it done?
I would love to claim it. But no, again, it was one of those creative processes. As this book was being birthed, um, it's like all these things just started to come into play like it was meant to be. And I had a connection with an artist in the Kansas City area who does abstract work with tapping into the creativity from a spiritual perspective of what's being called to come forth in a form to speak to you. And I was really appreciated. Jenny Hahn is her work. It's Hahn. And so I reached out to her and asked if she would be willing to collaborate in creating a book cover, because I did not want my cover to look like hopelessness and despair.
Mm.
I wanted it to represent that there is a seed planted within our heart from grief that has the potential to be nurtured, to grow and sprout and to become something more in the light. And so this painting came from her inspiration. And then she was willing to license it for me to use in my book production. And again, it's like every time I look at it, it's like it said, yes, that's the image that I want people to have, that inside this little heart,
Mm.
there's a seed, and that it radiates layers of energy. And eventually, the love that is within us and the light that is available to us, it calls it forth to come back and sprout and share another beauty into the world.
Yeah, thank you. Is it okay if I ask you a random question?
Oh,
Being a
sure.
minister, and you showed me a heart. What is the beatitude? Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. What does that mean to you?
It's interesting. I just referenced that in a message last
Mm.
Sunday. I had gone back into ministry. I'm now the senior minister at Unity of South Sound in Tacoma, Washington, and I realized there's a value when you're part of a spiritual community, that you support each other. It's a safe place to practice and to grow and evolve and to recognize the beauty in all of us. And so when I look at blessed are those that are pure in heart, it's the pureness of our divine self that is free of any imperfections, that is free of the little flecks that we absorb, that we take on, that diminish who we are. And that pureness of heart is who we really are. And so when we have the courage to be our authentic self, to let that light and that potential shine without holding back, no matter what the world says we are or what we can or can't be, then we become a blessing not only to ourselves but to the world around us. And it transforms things. It can't not make a difference. So, it's looking at, again, the Beatitudes. It's like every one of them is this powerful affirmative lesson of how we can choose to be in the world and make a difference and express our highest potential. It's inherently within all of us, no matter how we're showing up right now, today, which is why we can go back to that affirmation. Every day I get to choose how I'm going to show up.
Hmm.
And I can choose to be the beauty of my pure heart.
Yeah, I love that. What made you want to become a minister, a unity minister? What attracted you to unity?
I say I went into a kicking and screaming, but well, it's interesting. As I was very lucky. I grew up with a very eclectic spiritual upbringing, so I was exposed to different faith traditions and realized that people approach things differently. So it gave me a curious mind. I asked a lot of questions. They weren't always welcome. I had two uncles that were Baptist ministers, and we were sent off to summer camp, to make sure that we had, we were saved and had the appropriate background, and to not, and of course, every experience has value. But what I realized is not everybody is welcomes questions, that we can become very complacent with our beliefs and the foundation of how we are, and that it feels much safer to just accept what we've been told. But when we're ready, we start to consider the possibility of something different, and we get curious. And so I was very curious. When I was curious, my mom said, "You may want to go check out Unity. It's part of the New Thought spirituality. It's a more of a liberal expansion of what Christianity is." The founders of the Unity movement, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, from the late 1800s, were exposed to New Thought healing modalities that changed and transformed their lives. and they just wanted to share their experience with others, not to give up any religious beliefs that they have. And I don't think anybody has to. And yet we always want to be curious with an open mind. And that's where I was. And it led me to just taking a lot of classes and workshops. And I was struggling with, an abusive marriage and trying to find myself in the world. And my Unity Church became my transformative experience. And as I was taking classes, I discovered there was a process where you could become a licensed Unity teacher, which meant you were credentialed and you could teach classes for credit and serve. And I thought, well, I would like to help, I would like to serve, but I could never be the minister because the minister has to have everything figured out and have all the answers to the world. And I told my minister that, and she laughed at me. She said, well, then that would be an impossible task. Anyway, so as I became licensed, I was invited to guest speak. I was asked to teach classes. I evolved into becoming a spiritual leader at a small community in Kingston, Washington. And then I realized that my life had become a ministry. So perhaps I should get the credential of being ordained. And I decided that I would, and I did that for 10 years. I was terrified to apply to seminary because I didn't know what it would ask of me. So I finally did. I said, if they say yes, then that's my path. If they say no, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. But they said yes. And so 10 years after becoming a licensed teacher, I became an ordained minister in 2007. And I realized that calling is a calling to allow yourself to go deeper into your own spiritual growth and development. I'm under a microscope of others watching. How is she going to manage life? And there's some pressure to that. But I realized then that I have to have a deeper commitment to my spiritual practice. And if I'm going to invite anybody to do anything or to consider anything in their life, then I have to be willing to practice it myself, or I'm disingenuous. So I think my call was my soul saying, you really wanted to get serious about life this time around.
I might look into that myself, to be honest. I really enjoy the Unity movement. Reading your book, I love the acronym of HOPE, help other people evolve. And I hear that very strong in your book because you're helping people heal, transform, and have a deeper sense of understanding, going from grief to gratitude. And speaking of Maryann Williamson, she talks about a miracle as a transformation from fear to love. And I feel that when I'm reading your book. I haven't read it completely, but what I have touched, it's pretty heavy. It's very profound with the human experience and written from your heart. So I truly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, and I felt like when I was writing my story, I needed to share my story of my relationship with my son, because it was through him that I had a lot of different powerful and empowering spiritual experiences that kind of paved my way to have the foundation so that I could survive his death. And I have deep empathy for those that may not be prepared. I was serving as a minister of a spiritual community at the time he died. And yet I still had to honor my human experience in that all I wanted to do for a while was just to bury myself under the covers and never come out again. And yet I had to say, okay, what would I say to somebody else that was going through this to help them through it? What are the steps? And so it evolved. And I think that's what happens for all of us when we have the courage to honor the deeper calling within us. Instead of second guessing it or saying, oh, that would be too hard, or, only really special people do that, or I don't have the money or the time, or whatever stories we tell ourselves. If it's meant for you to do and you open yourself up, the resources and the way will be revealed. And all you have to do is have the courage to say yes and step through the door. And I think that that's what I tried to offer people in my book, and sharing the depth of relationship, but also the potential that we all have in surviving no matter what life throws at us.
Yeah, thank you. Any last thoughts on your book, Grief, or Unity Awakening Ways?
Oh, the more and more that I have evolved from writing my book, working with individuals, just being present to each other, is a reminder of the gift that we have of ourself wherever we find ourselves. And that for each and every one of us, if we can have the courage to just awaken to the who we are through our heart and mind, to not be afraid of our light. Maryann Williamson wrote about that, to not diminish it, but to have the courage to shine. And it comes from just being a presence of love. That's all we have to do. I think that's what I really discovered in the most beautiful and profound way in walking through the process of grief and having the courage to write my book. And so I offer that to anyone and everyone who has been wounded, whose heart feels shattered, who is dealing with an enormous amount of pain that feels like they're consumed by it, to reach out and find a resource, a support that can walk you through the process until you're ready to do it for yourself. It will be the greatest gift you give yourself. I think that's why I wrote this book.
Yeah, thank you. And how can we find you if someone wants some grief less coaching?
My website is www.unravelinggrief.com, which has all of the information about my grief services and access to my book and the meditations. My husband and I also have an alternative ministry, Unity Awakening Ways, which is also a website, which is a .org. And my email, I would offer this one, unravelinggrief@gmail.com. You can reach out to me if you have any questions, if you want to find out about but all of the links to everything is on my website. And there's a contact where you can send your questions and ask about what I have to offer you as well.
Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you being on here.
Thank you. It's been a joy. I always appreciate talking to somebody that's open and receptive to healing and transforming.
Yeah, thank you and take care.
You too. Blessings.
Blessings. Namastizzle.